it is a victor. Sort of, yeah, you don't ever lose being a victor unless you do something really terrible. So he's still a bit, he doesn't actually practice now being a victor. But when I said if we were preaching through Hebrews, it's sort of, oh goodness, that's a bit of a heavy book to be going through. And it's quite tricky as a book. It is quite tricky because you do need to sort of look at it, and you need to look at it a bit hard to get stuff from it. But there is good stuff in it. And we've been going through it, and when we've been looking through it, what we've been trying to do is look at one particular theme to it, which is that Jesus is better than what's gone before. And he's better, so we've had Jesus better than the angels, Jesus is better than Moses, Jesus is the better high priest, that he's a better sacrifice, and that he's a better covenant, which is what Jonathan did last week. And I kind of think, you sometimes think when you read through it, you think, well, why didn't, like we said right at the beginning, why didn't the writer just say, well, look, just scrap all of that. Jesus is best. You can forget everything that's gone before, and just, you don't need to know all that stuff. And I've kind of been thinking, but actually, perhaps there's meaning in everything that has happened before, that actually through God working through history, that actually the stuff that's happened before Jesus is important. And I was kind of thinking, well, what's a way of trying to express that? And last week was the FA Cup. It was the round, the fourth round of the FA Cup. And it's a qualifying round, so it's not the FA Cup final, but it's the rounds that happen before that. So the teams knock each other out, and then eventually you get to the final. And it was the fourth round last week. It's sort of, in the last couple of rounds, teams in the top divisions have joined in with teams that have been fighting their way up through this competition and getting up there to, and last week, Kidderminster Harriers played. Does anyone know who they played? Oh, I know you do, yeah. Does anyone else know? But otherwise, you're my go-to person. West Ham, yes, and they did, and it was almost, wasn't it, in terms of, it was a very close thing. Kidderminster Harriers got knocked out by West Ham, and yeah, but the thing is, that wasn't the final, was it? That was just one of the rounds, and then you go through, and then you get to the FA Cup final, which is the two best teams in the tournament, and they battle it out. And the final is the showcase. It's the place where, you know, it's on the big stage, it's a bigger stadium, there's loads more fans, there's a lot of fanfare. There used to be like hours and hours. If you were a little bit of a certain age, you remember that it used to start way early in the morning. You get up really early, you wait for the whole day. It's not quite the same tournament it once was, but yeah, it was that kind of thing. But the FA Cup final was the big deal. But actually, it didn't mean that all the rounds that happened leading up to that were totally irrelevant. The Kidderminster Harriers v West Ham plays an important part. It's not as good standard, and it may not be played in the same stadium, but it has the same form. It's playing the same game. There's a certain amount of it that is part of it. And actually, the tournament, the FA Cup final, is in some way like raised up to be this big thing because of everything that's gone before. And that is kind of like what the Hebrews writer is saying about Jesus. When he's talking about Jesus being better than Moses and being a better priest and being a better sacrifice, what he's saying is that Jesus is the FA Cup final. But the stuff that's gone before, those earlier rounds, are not irrelevant to it. They help us see why Jesus is supreme. Jesus is the best. And so I just want to sort of give that picture, because I want us to then think, okay, it's hard going looking at some of this stuff, but actually in it, we might find something more that elevates Jesus to who he is. And one of the other things you'll see in that is that actually in the book of Hebrews, is what comes out is God is a God who is faithful. And partly what you see through the history of the Bible, that is the big shout out, that God is faithful to his promises. And that's exactly what Claire was praying and others prayed, is God is faithful. What does that mean, other than that he keeps his promises that he made way back in the Old Testament, so hundreds of years before Jesus, and he intends to keep those promises all the way through. And it also shows in Hebrews that you'll see that Jesus is also faithful. So one of the things you'll see is that it's mentioned a few times that Jesus is called the faithful son, and I think he's called the faithful priest somewhere as well. And so what you see is not only is God faithful to what's gone before in the Old Testament and coming through into Jesus, but what you also see is that in Jesus you see the faithful son, this human, this God who's human, who is faithful to what God's asked him to do in all that Jesus does. And it's that idea of God's faithfulness and how we then respond in faith to God, in trusting in God, that I want to speak about today. So we're going to read through, if you bring up Ian on the PowerPoint, Hebrews 10 from verse 12. And I'm just going to read it to us. And it says this. But when, from verse 12 there, it says, but when this priest, and he's talking about Jesus at this point, had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God, and since that time he waits for his enemies to be made his footstool. For by one sacrifice he has been made perfect forever, those who are being made holy. And the Holy Spirit also testifies to us about this. And first he says this is the covenant I will make with them. And after that time, says the Lord, I will put my laws in their hearts, and I will write them on their minds. And then he adds, their sins and lawless acts I will remember no more. And where these have been forgiven, sacrifice for sin is no longer necessary. Therefore, brothers and sisters, since we have confidence to enter the most holy place by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way opened up for us through the curtain that is his body. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let's draw near to God with a sincere heart and with the full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who has promised it is faithful. And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. It's quite a long bit of passage, but this passage, one of the things in it is that first bit, it quotes from two Old Testament passages. So two promises that God has made in the Old Testament that are now fulfilled in Jesus. And he's doing a bit of a recap, really, on everything that he's been saying in the previous chapters in the letter. And you'll find that with Hebrews, it sort of goes through, and then you get a kind of a bit of a come on there, exaltation. There's a bit of a, because of this, now this, and it builds up and builds up. Near the end of the letter, which we're coming to, it's really a lot about, we've already seen what Jesus has done, now how are we going to respond? So, yeah. So he's basically inviting a response. He said, because of Jesus, because of what he's done, do this. And last week, Jonathan spoke on the covenant, and that's this agreement that God makes with humans in how he will relate to them. And Jonathan said that covenant was this word that we don't really use in everyday language, but it's an agreement between two people or two peoples. And the basis of keeping a covenant and trust is, that's the thing, is that if you do a covenant with someone, you are basically giving them a load of promises and you're committing yourself that you're going to carry them out. But we use that idea of faith and promises actually all the time. It's not massively different to what we do. So, for example, have I got a volunteer child that would come and I've got two pieces of paper that someone can have, and you've got a volunteer to. It'd be worth your while. If you're a young child and you want something that's worth your while, you might come down here.
Isaac,
Two.
followed you down.
Right. Would you agree, Jude, that these two pieces of paper are about the same size? Would you agree? Isaac, why don't you wait down? I've got something else for you in a minute. You have a seat, yeah. Would you agree these are about the same size? Is there any one that you would rather have? Which one would you rather have out of these two? Sure. It's nice and shiny, it's a nice colour. Sure you don't want that one? You're pretty confident you want that one. Can you tell me why? Can you read on it? It's very small. Can you read on there what that says? Under the Bank of England there, what does that say? Can you read that?
I promise to pay the man the sum of £5.
Fantastic. That's what it says. It's a promise on a piece of paper. And that piece of paper, what can you do with that piece of paper now? What could you do? What could you use it for? Come on. You could go to the shops and you could give that piece of paper, and what could you get for that piece of paper? Food, yeah, drinks, and they'll give it to you, won't they? They'll give you real things because they will. The Bank of England for misses. That's it. You can have that. Off you go. Where you go? That's on paper, isn't it? It's a promise, but it's important, isn't it? Because actually, it's a promise by the Bank of England, and that's what makes that good. Don't give it to your mum; she'll spend it. See, our confidence in you going into a shop to swap that piece of paper for something like a food or drink or whatever he spends it on is based on the fact that we know that the Bank of England is going to do that promise. And the promise is only good as what's behind them. And that's really important because God is saying, I've given you these promises, but the God of the universe is the one that's making these promises. So he's saying, look, you can bank on this stuff. You think money's reliable, you can bank on me. And the other thing about covenants is, I want to take another illustration of what a covenant is. So a really good one is the covenant of marriage. Did anyone shout out what's involved in a marriage ceremony when you have, what's it meant when you go to a marriage ceremony? What are the elements that you tend to see at a marriage ceremony? Anyone can shout out. And this could be children or adults. Vows. Rings, exchange rings. Commitment, yeah. Signing the certificate, the marriage certificate, yeah. So you might say for witnesses, anyone got any objections yet to getting married? People. And who are the two people that are most important in the marriage bit? We got the priest, yeah, got it, yeah. And the people getting married, and they're declaring what to one another by getting married. What are they saying to one another in the vows that Jonathan says? What are the sort of things they're saying? They're making promises to one another. And what would those sort of promises say or be like, kind of thing? Well, people write their own, I know these days a bit more.
Whether things are good or bad,
yeah, so there's that commitment element that you mentioned, David. They're saying that whatever happens, good or bad, we're going to stick together. Yeah, yeah.
Sickness and in health.
In sickness and in health, that's the yeah. Faithfulness to one another. Yeah. Do you think it's an expression of love? Marriage? It is, isn't it? It's an expression of, you know, when I went and got married with Felicity, I was really, so what I was saying is that I love you so much that I want to be with you and I want to stay with you and I want to, it doesn't matter what happens to you when you get sick or I get man flu, we are going to be together. And over 20 years of man flu, Felicity's still there. Good on her. But that's the thing. But not all covenants look the same. So not all of these agreements look the same. But there's a part of it which it is about two people. You know, it's two parties. And it is about commitment. And it is about making promises. And it is about sometimes having signs and ways of sealing that deal. You know, so I have a ring that isn't my marriage, but it symbolises my marriage. And I've got my marriage certificate here that is another symbol of, like Jonathan said, of what I've been married. And so there are these things that are parts of covenants. Yeah, so we're talking about when Jesus comes, he says there's going to be a new covenant between God and people. And it's really important we look at marriage because actually in the promise that is quoted in here is from an Old Testament book called Jeremiah. It's very important actually that we look at marriage because actually God says, I was like a husband to you, and then you were unfaithful to me. And so he uses the marriage thing as one of the ways of expressing how he feels towards the people of Israel. So, like I said, God is making these commitments, and they vary a little bit in terms of what he commits, but also what's key in it is God is blessing. So one of the things is when me and Flick got married, part of my declaring the promises to her is to say, look, I love you and I'm going to be a blessing to you. So when you are sick, I'm going to go get some soup for you or something like that. Or I'm going to look after you. So part of my declaring is actually about blessings. And I don't know if people remember, Jonathan mentioned the covenant that was on their driveway, on their house, the driveway, the other people could access it. He had a covenant on his property, which was basically saying, look, we're letting the other people be able to get to and fro on it. So it was a blessing to the other people, otherwise they couldn't have got into their house. But we're going to play a little game now. So this is a game where really we're going to have a little quick look at God's covenants with his people, because they're all through the Old Testament and comes into the New Testament. So we're going to have a look. And so I need someone to be a volunteer. Could you start us off, Isaac? So you start, it's like pass the parcel without the music. I want you to take the top layer off, and then when you open it up and find out what's inside, then you can pass on. So when you take the top layer, and then I want you to pass it to someone else when you take what's in the top layer. So I have probably wrapped it up a bit, and I made it tricky. Oh, you're doing well. You're doing well. Away. There's something else in there as well. Oh, that ripped it off. Sweets are yours. You can have the sweets. And what does that mean? I don't know if you can read that. Can you read what that says? Anyone read that? Joel, you read that? What's that say? Adam and Eve. So the first sort of covenant, and it doesn't, in the Bible, it doesn't actually say it's a covenant, but if you read it, it very much looks like a covenant. The first thing that God does is he makes a covenant with Adam and Eve. And that's the first one he does. Isaac, would you give this to someone else now to open up the next layer? You can choose who you give it to. Anyone you like. Oh, to Jude! You're doing well today, aren't you? Right, you'll have to. Huh? Yeah, get that one off and then that's the way. See if you can get under the next layer. There'll be another card in there. Keep going. I think that's sort of the. Wow. Yeah, that is well done up, isn't it? That's all your presents like. Oh, what you found in there? Another one. Oh, you read what that says. Noah. So then Noah, and then God makes a covenant with Noah, and he makes a promise to Noah. Just pop it down there, mate. That's great. You want to give that to someone else now? You can't give it back to Isaac. We'll have a win. You can't go back. Other you two might get a good deal going there. Oh, look at that. It's just your sister. So what we've got is God revealing himself through his covenants to people over time. So these things happen over a long space of time. But each time, God makes a promise or a series of promises to people, an agreement with people that then, over time, you need that one. Abraham. Does anyone know the promise that he made to Abraham? Now you can give that to whoever you like. Everything, yeah. So we've got right. Does anyone know what the promise or one of the promises or the covenant with Abraham? Anyone know anything there?
That she may be father of many nations.
Yeah. So a blessing. So he says he's going to have many descendants, and he's going to be a blessing and a blessing to other nations. So yeah. And then we got Moses, and you can give that now to whoever you like. So then we've got Moses. So he makes a covenant with Moses, and this is really important. One, Moses. Well, they're all really important, but Moses is significant in Hebrews because with that one becomes all of these kind of with it comes the expectations of the law in terms of responding to God's faithfulness in His covenant was to say, look, to be my people. He says you're going to be my people. But I want you to respond to me with the law. I want you to respond by following the things I ask of you. And then David comes along and he makes a promise. It's to David, and then you can give that to whoever you give it to, if you want him to. And the promise to David was that he was a king, and the promise to David was that his descendants would reign on the throne forever. It is, I've made it bad. I have made them tough to get into. Yeah. Come on, son. You can do it. Bit of muscle. Well done. Right. Who's that? Jesus. And that's the big prize. And that's the thing about the parcel. Sure, go. Yeah. And that's the thing about the parcel is you get to this place where you get to the prize at the bottom, don't you? You go through these layers. And that is what God is doing through his covenants. He's revealing. Did he need to go and swap the Bible? Might have been a good deal, actually. But yeah, so this is the point about this. You go through these layers that all the time, and then you get to Jesus. And Jesus is the final, and he brings this new covenant that is the covenant that is in view in the Hebrews. And one of the things you notice there is what I gave is I gave the children a choice as to who they gave it to, and who they passed that on to. And that's really important because there is one really big difference about how God makes his covenants when you start reading about them, is that he makes them and he decides the terms. So one of the things is he decides, like you guys did, who you give it to next. He decided who he was going to give it to next, and he then set the terms of the covenant. When me and Flick got married, we didn't do that. Flick had had some promises she wanted to make me, and I had some. It was a bit of a mutual thing or whatever going on. But with God, he sets it out and he lays it out. Now you might think, well, it's a bit off, isn't it? God kind of determining what. But then he's the creator and we are the created. And so that's really important that we get our heads around that, is that he's the maker. He's the one, and he has that relationship with us where he's the father and we are the child. And that's really important for us to get our heads around, because it's a bit like we can, so an example would be, I can, the maker of my car tells me what oil I put in my car. Okay, the maker of the car tells me I've got a little app, tells me exactly the type of oil to put in my car. I can do whatever I like and ignore those instructions. But actually, if I want the best for my car, I'll put in the oil the maker says. And in the same way, God's covenants are the best that he's got for us. That's the point. What he promises and what he says in the agreement is his best for us. But as I say, if you look through them, they also show you, in the same way, if you wanted to look up what our marriage is like, you would sort of look at the promises of our vows, because that will give you some sense of what our marriage is supposed to look like. You would be a bit, curious if it didn't look anything like that. And then in the same way, that is God. If you want to know something of God, look at the promises he makes to people, because actually they're blessings in them. There are expectations he has, but there are blessings in them for people. And so if you want to know something about God, look at his covenants. And the other thing about it is those covenants also show something up. These covenants all through the Old Testament show something not just about who God is, but they also show something about who humans who he makes these covenants are. And what we see is, whereas he is faithful to his promises, what we see is time and time again, humans are shown up for being unfaithful until you get to Jesus. And then you see Jesus showing his faithfulness. Now, I want to make it to sort of display really what Hebrews then has been going on about up to Hebrews and including Hebrews 10, is to try and make this visual for us. And I'm going to try and do this without tripping over something or, yeah. So, Joe, could you help me again? Could I have another helper, please? Someone? Would anyone help? You don't have to say anything. Isaac, come on down. William, thank you. Joel, would you come and would you just set those chairs up there? Those chairs, 3 chairs there. Bring them. Isaac, grab a chair. Bring it into the centre here. So those 3 with the things on, and face with the backs of the chair with those words faced on it. So here we've got some obstacles. If you pop that one up and there, a bit, whatever, just around there. Face that, that's it, wonderful, and then bring those 2 up, lovely. Excellent, excellent. Right, so, Joel, could I borrow you a second? Now, if you see that rope there, that rope is representative of the life of Jesus and the work of Jesus. And if you just grab the end of that rope and bring it this way, and Jesus' life, one of the things he's saying is that Jesus enters the world as a human and he goes through life. And I don't know if you can, what does that say on the front there? And he experiences what it is to be human. And so, thanks, John. So he goes through on his life, experiencing something of the things that we experience as humans. And he goes through that and he continues on and he comes through trials and temptations. So Jesus experiences, just like we would, he experiences difficulties like trials and temptations. And then he also experiences suffering and pain. And ultimately, he dies. But the important thing is, when he dies, because he's not sinned, because in doing that, he's been faithful to God throughout it. He is this sacrifice, this perfect sacrifice. And that's what Hebrews 10, if you bring it back up, the first slide of that, that's what he's saying is that because Jesus has done all that, he's this perfect sacrifice. And then, as we said, he enters, he comes back to life, and then he ascends, and he enters the presence of God. And this curtain that Moz so brilliantly was talking about, this separation from God because of the unfaithfulness of humans, is with his body is gone. And we are now accessible to God. And so it talks about Jesus coming through here, and it ends there. That's where it ends. The verses here talk about Jesus now sitting at the right hand of God. Okay, he's at the right hand of God. And imagine going to see the Queen. What would you do if you went to see the Queen? What would you likely do if you came into the Queen's presence? You bow. Probably wait, wouldn't you? If you go to see the Queen, you probably wait till she told you to come into the room. So you wait till she comes in, and then you come into the room. And then you probably bow a little bit and say, can I come forward a bit? Should I stand here? Should I stand there? It'd be like that, wouldn't it? Royalty, you'd be. But Jesus doesn't do that. Jesus, because he's the faithful Son of God, and because he's done exactly what God's asked him to do, he sits down at the right hand of God. That'd be like me walking in to see the Queen, walking right up, and then just plonking myself down next to Queen Elizabeth, saying, I'm here. That sort of, he's that, right next to the Queen. That is what is going on. So the picture here is it's from a Psalm 110, and it's saying that, and that's from the Old Testament, it's saying this promise of God that there would be this human, this descendant of King David, this promise to David, this covenant promise to David would come and sit at the right hand of God, right there next to him. And he's there waiting. And he's there, not just waiting, he's actively then saying, look, it's not enough that it's just me. I've come for others because I'm going to have a people. And so what he then does is, I need another volunteer now. I've got a volunteer. Anyone else that hasn't had a volunteer that wants to, or Isaac can have another go, that's great. Okay, brilliant, up you come. You've got the idea here, haven't you? There's treats here, isn't there? Right. So like I said, that's gone on. But Jesus has done this for a reason. And what's happening now is that he's saying that actually to the Hebrews, he's saying, look, life's getting tough and life's getting difficult. But what he's saying is, I'm giving you a promise now that you are connected to me. You are connected to Jesus and the life. And you're going to put your trust in Jesus. And what he's going to do is going to put, so we are going to, when we go through life, what we are going to do, this signifies the work that Jesus has already done. And we are now going to be connected into it. So what I'd like you to do is try and connect that. We've got a little belt here, there's a little more Jesus. You start that to there. Right, and could you click yourself on to the right? And what he's saying is that in a way that, you don't need to type it. We get out of it then. What he's saying is that now I've put a new heart and a new mind in you, and I've connected you to the life of Jesus, and you are now securely in the life of Jesus. You are now secure, you have a new heart, and it's by the Holy Spirit says that's what I've given you that now, and you're going to want to follow, you're going to have a desire to want to follow Jesus. And then what it says, when you go through your life, so you're going to go through difficulties, so if you want to follow the road, you might have to fall through. As you go through life, that's it, keep going. As you might have to go up over that one. As you go through life and you hit these trials, which is just watch the road, let me just pull it through. So as you go through life and keep going, you're connected to Jesus, and he's ahead of you already, and he's interceding for you ahead. And then when Jesus returns and you get to the end of your life, you get this reward. Isaac, unclip yourself, grab your reward, mate. There's a reward up there for you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Excellent. Well done. Give a little round of applause for that. So Jesus is God's representative. But what's happened is, as we go through life, we are connected to him by his Spirit. And that's really important, because what we're saying is that as we look, we realise that actually it's not us that's done it. Already Jesus has completed it, and we're putting our trust in him. And what this writer is saying is, look, don't trust in yourself. Don't put your hope in yourself. Trust in what's already happened. Take hold of the rope. Take hold of what Jesus has already done and live your life. Live your life connected to him, with you on what he's already accomplished already and where he's already seated. And be assured that he's already there and he is interceding. It talks in Romans about he's interceding, which means he's speaking on our behalf. And that's what this is all about, this bit. And our faith is holding on to that and keeping going in it. It's not, when we connect to Jesus, we don't stay still. It means we follow him wherever he takes us, and we lead and we follow him, but we're connected to him by his spirit. So we're in faith, we know that what's already accomplished. So when we mess up and when we make mistakes or whatever, we remember that actually we're connected to what Jesus has already done, the path that he's already taken, that has got us, that is getting us there. And actually, one of the things that Hebrews is all about is staying with your eyes on where Jesus already is. And that's what he's saying. Trust this, trust the road. Jesus is enough for every wrong, every inadequacy we've done. And so he says a few things. He says, let's hold unswerving, let's draw near to God with a sincere heart and with full assurance that faith brings, having our hearts sprinkled to cleanse us from a guilty conscience and having our bodies washed with pure water. He's saying that, trust the road, trust Jesus, everything he's done is enough for us. And he's saying, let's hold unswervingly to the hope that we profess, for he who promised is faithful. So if he's saying, don't drift off, remember the promises of God. Remember that psalm has been fulfilled in Jesus, that he sits there. And we can end up hoping in all the wrong things. That verse says there, don't hope in this, hope in in Jesus. But we can end up hoping in things, temporary things, like, oh, I hope I get a new job, or I hope school's better next week. And we can end up putting all our confidence in those. He's saying, no, hope in this eternal thing that has been accomplished by Jesus. And hold unswervingly means we live and we follow Jesus wherever he goes and whatever he says to do. So when Jesus says live like this, part of connecting to the rope is saying we're going to live like that. And his heart and the mind that he gives us is saying, I want a desire to live like that. If you know Jesus in your heart, then you will have a desire and a mind that wants to follow him. And he says then also, let us spur one another on towards love and good deeds, and encouraging one another in this as we see the day approaching. See, there will be a day when Jesus wraps it all up. There will be a day when Jesus returns, and that day he will do something that, except to hear about this day approaching. At that day, Jesus then will welcome us to be with him. And the other thing about this is, because it's about people, it says stop meeting together as a group of us together. God's new covenant is blessed people, and it said, and Jonathan mentioned this, the least and the greatest. And whether you feel like you're the least, or whether you feel like you're pretty great, it says here that everyone will know God. Everyone will know God. So, I mean, it was great. We had an opportunity on Thursday night, we gathered to pray, and it was just a great opportunity where a couple of people were just saying, I'm really struggling here, I need some help. And I need someone to just pray. I need some, encouragement or whatever. And then we get the opportunity to do that together, to pray for one another, encourage one another. And we take every opportunity to do that. And just like in the Hebrews, that they were the guys that this person was writing to, they were struggling. They keep our faith is simply this: to follow Jesus wherever he asks us to go, whatever he asks us to do, and knowing with confidence that he's already gone before us. And the covenants in the Bible, the stuff that shows us this, is showing us all the time revelation of God. He's telling us about how he wants to relate to us, but ultimately it brings us to Jesus, and it's fulfilled in who Jesus is. And that's what the writer of Hebrews is trying to do. And the covenants are built on God's promises, and the promises are built on God's faithfulness. Jesus is the FA Cup final. That's the big deal of Hebrews. Jesus is the final. He's the pinnacle of all of the things that God does. And the rope is his faithfulness. The rope is his faithful actions throughout his life and death and resurrection and ascension. And what he promised that he will do, one day he will come back. And I want to give all the kids a little reminder of this by, could you just wrap the Carolina? That thing, those things, yeah. Oh, yeah, just yeah. So I want to give the kids just one of these, the little ones here, and a sweet, and have a packet of sweets. And I just want to remember this, because the carabiner is kind of a good reminder of this. First of all, that God's promises are like this, they hold you fast to the rope. God is faithful, and God gives you the Spirit, and He says it will hold you fast. So the carabiner locks on to the rope, and I want you to take one of the ways and remember, God is going to keep me. God is faithful to His promises, and He will keep me no matter what life, no matter what trials go on. God is going to be faithful, and He's going to keep me safe. And then the other thing I want to remember about the carabiner is you'll notice it's got a little gap in it. And Moz mentioned this the other week about Jesus is the bridge. Jesus is the bridge. There is a gap between us and God because of our sinfulness, but Jesus closes the gap. Jesus is the one that keeps that gap closed. And then finally, I just want to say that when it's closed, it's a complete thing. And what this also reminds us of, that complete circle, is that every promise of God in the Bible is in 2 Corinthians, it says every promise is yes in Jesus. And that's what God means. He means everything that He is going to do and fulfill is through His Son Jesus. And the completed leap reminds you that God has completed everything that He says He's going to do with Jesus. So if you want to come up and grab some sweets and grab a little one of those, you can attach to the school bag or something, you're more than welcome. So grab one to remind yourselves. And that's it, we are done. I've got to tidy up now, but we are done. So yeah, let me just pray for us. Jesus, thank you that we have a faithful God and that you are faithful from the very beginning, from the very first promise that you have made to humankind, all the way through. And you continue to be faithful. And thank you that that faithfulness is displayed magnificently in the FA Cup final of people, which is Jesus. And that in Jesus, the faithful Son who went through his life faithfully following you, you have fulfilled everything. And we just thank you for that. And help us to remember that and to trust in you with all of our hearts and our minds, Lord. In your precious name. Amen. We're done. Bless.